just to introduce the topic a little bit, I thought I'd start with a couple of questions, if I could. So, by show of hands, for all the people in state government here and local government, who has one system that does all of your business needs across all your different programs and divisions, that's perfectly architected and shares a common data model? Raise your hands. Oh yeah, I got one back here. Okay, good. That's the matrix. That's what that is.
Really?
Yeah.
We work in the same place.
So more likely is who has several systems across, to serve each of the specific program needs within each of those programs, that has its own unique data model, but also happens to share data elements with other systems and other programs. Any hands? Okay, good. So, that's all great. And Dr. Scott was up here actually earlier talking about some of the trends and where things are going. And I think there was a real emphasis for many years on just making sure that you're solving the needs of the particular program that you're trying to serve with your system. And that's a lot of times was about recording transactions, not necessarily analyzing data. But as we've matured and as new questions are being asked and new patterns are being identified and there's more capable tool sets even out there, we're starting to look and say, hey, well, what if we did compare data across these multiple systems? What kind of answers might we be able to find? Would we be able to deliver services better, as Dr. Scott was just talking about, or could we identify fraud maybe in franchise tax board case? Could we make sure that our voter registration list is as accurate as possible, right, during the election? So, this is kind of the topic that we're talking about today. Master data management really sort of addresses all that, and we're going to talk today specifically about two case studies within a couple of state government departments. One is Franchise Tax Board, and the other is VoteCal and Secretary of State. So with that, that's kind of the introduction to the topic. I also, I noticed, and Jeff will appreciate this, I know, I think everybody has a data problem, right? I mean, we've all got a similar data problem, but you know who has a data problem, Jeff, is the 49ers. The 49ers, I'm convinced, have a data problem because at the end of the most critical game of the season, they called the exact same play that they called 3 times in a row in last year's Super Bowl and failed. So clearly, Greg Roman needs some master data management to go along to make sure that he cleans up that data and is better able to predict probability of a play, because that was awful. Anyway, I'm not bitter about it. I'm moving on. It's baseball season. And we're not here to talk about that anyway. So let me introduce my team for a minute. Over the past few months, once Russ started the planning for the session, it was really great to get together with my team, and we've sort of talked about all these different ideas, and collectively we decided what might make sense to present to our peers here. And so let me introduce Vicky Sady. Vicky is the Department of Healthcare Services CAMUS Deputy Director. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, and many of you probably know her. Jeff McTygue is our Manager of Business Intelligence and Data Services. And I realize I got your department wrong. Am I projecting up here at all? I'm not even projecting. Uh-oh. Okay, let me see if I can work that out. It's off. Okay. Anyway, Jeff is not with the Department of Healthcare Services. He's actually with the Franchise Tax Board. So somehow that slipped through our editorial process. Also with us is Jean Fredericks from the Franchise Tax Board. She is the Director of Technology Planning and Decision Support. And I'm Jason Fedota. I'm the Sales Executive for California State Government with CGI. So we talked about saying, well, maybe we should take a look at how we define master data management. And it is up there, thank goodness. Okay. So we looked at a few different resources. DAMA is a data management association. Looked at Gartner and of course Wikipedia, because it's the source of all truth, as we all know. And what stuck out to me with this was, I think when we all talk about master data management, oftentimes we're thinking about a tool, right? Or we're sort of obsessed with that bright and shiny object that's going to promise to do all those things that we really need to do with our master data, right? To combine all those data elements, to merge them, to find the duplicates, to kick out the bad ones and all this stuff. But really it's much more than that. And if you look at these definitions, each one of them has a component of, it's really a business process. It's a practice, right? It's not just the tool. It's not just the method. It's the process and practice around master data management. And actually, when we were doing our planning for the sessions, I think that was one of the things that came out, and especially we were talking to Vicky, she's like, we should really tell everybody, all the different things that are related to master data management, how you organize for it, how you execute a project against it, what's your governance policy around all that, which becomes a real issue, and Jeff will talk about that a little bit later. So if you see kind of all these definitions share some of that, and so I thought that was the thing that jumped out to me. It's not just the tool that you're using to do it, it's actually all of the business process around it, okay? So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and jump into the case study.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you, Jason. Thank you all for your time. We are using master data management in support of a key project at Franchise Tax Board. It is the Enterprise Data to Revenue, or EDR project. It is a big project. It's taking a while. The good news is that it's been fairly successful to date. We've been able to generate $680 million in new revenue for the state. There are several components to this project. The ones that I want to focus on for this presentation are three: a taxpayer folder, which is a consolidated view of our customers. It's an OLTP application. We are building an enterprise data warehouse, which will store all of the detailed information about our customers. And then we are delivering enterprise modeling services. And for those of you who were at an earlier presentation where I spoke, this is an extension of some of the work we did with SPSS and some of the predictive analytics. But the kind of thread that runs through all of this is the idea of using master data management to identify and organize our customer data. And, I'll talk some about terms and definitions, but also then about how we, less about the technology and more about how we kind of governed and tried to deliver this. So let me begin by stating the obvious. California is a big state, and you see my next slide. We have a lot of data. We compound that or enhance that by creating a lot more data with the data received. So we have terabytes of data. And of course, and I'm sure we're the only ones that do this, we don't handle that data consistently. So if you go back to Jason's intro, we have, and I'm jumping a slide, but we have a variety of systems, and they all work and they all talk to each other, but they don't necessarily care that the other system understands them. But just to put it in perspective with our volumes of data, we're keeping track of about 60 million individuals and business entities. Each year, we receive 50 million tax returns and associated documents. The schedules and those are now we're approaching 500 million. And then when you count all the income records and other data that we receive, we're over 1 billion. And these last three are annually. And so it is quite a challenge wading through and sifting through that data. And again, the goal of the EDR project was to use the data better in our compliance and customer service activities. And in terms of inconsistent data, so we have 5 large systems that do our compliance and our tax accounting, and we have dozens of minor ones. And they all have their own rules for how they extract data, match data, store data, record data, and they're not really interested in what the other system does. The other issue is if you go back to the 1 billion records received, most are clean, but if you have a 20% error rate on 1 billion records, that's quite a bit of errors. And I want to make it clear that these applications do talk to each other, they do interact, and my shop is responsible a lot of times for bringing them together in a little bit better way through business intelligence, data warehouse, data marts. What we've never done before, and we are starting to do, is try to, instead of worry about it at the back end, get up in front and be proactive. And that's easier said than done, and I'll allude to that. I'm sorry, I do want to go back. The last slide on this is, again, our matching has been pretty straightforward, a kind of binary. And then again, when we have the problem data, that's not going to match, it's going to fall out, so we're losing a lot of data. And so the idea here is to bring in a little more flexibility, a little more ability to deal with the problem data. So instead of a deterministic exact match, we're using probabilistic matching. And so going back to MDM as being the thread for these deliverables for EDR, so what do we want to do? How do we support those deliverables? We want that enterprise customer data store, that single version of the truth, to use all the magic buzzwords. And we'd settle for like maybe double vision of the truth, but I mean, so getting there, we want an enterprise or a consolidated process for matching and searching. So the idea that if you type in an ID or a name, it doesn't matter where it resides, we're looking for it in a consistent way. And again, the probabilistic matching routines to better deal with problem data. Now I'm going to get into, and I hope I don't bore you with, kind of the definitions, the basics of master data management. And some of this is the practice and some of it is the software, but you have the concept of sources. And these are the data feeds you have. So our 5 legacy systems are sources. We get between 35 and 40 external feeds, and those are all sources. And they all have demographic data. Ideally, in a perfect world, they would all have some type of unique key that you could use to keep track of them and to update them. Unfortunately, most of the third-party data, and when I say third-party data, that's W-2s, 1099s, federal tax returns, most of that data we receive does not have that primary key. And from your sources, within them, you have members, and that's a record within a source file. And it can be a unique, or it can be repeated. Picture someone who has 2 or 3 jobs or has 4 or 5 1099s, that's okay. But you would like that unique identifier. It makes life easier when you're doing your updates. The nice thing about the approach between members and let me jump forward, and then the next slide is entities. So if you take your source files, they have their members. At the end of the day, you want those members compared and linked into entities. And so jumping back to the member concept, I think what's pretty powerful about the approach in the software of keeping members separate is that you're not commingling your data, you're not losing track of it, you're not mangling things. So the idea is that each source retains its identity, it gives you an audit trail, and at the same time as you build your entities, you're in a controlled fashion, you're bringing together the elements from those different member and source files together. So in this slide, you have an entity that we've created, and it's sourced from 3 different sources, and you can see the various member records within those sources. And this is essentially the same thing, but the idea down there at the bottom in the yellow or the gold is that you're starting to build and keep and maintain all the variations that you see from your source files, so that your second match, your second year's match, or your subsequent matches are much more powerful and better because now you have all the variations. So if a record comes in and it's missing or has a transposed social or a name through marriage or divorce has changed, you have all those variations, and you're comparing those records to those, and you're enriching, in a sense, you're enriching your data, or you're just basically keeping it and making it available. But the idea is the software, in theory, improves over time, and your matching improves over time. A little bit about the approach. It's like any data warehouse BI development, there's a methodology and an approach, and I would argue this is software agnostic. It doesn't really care. It's a good practice. You begin by analyzing your data, and I think we were fortunate in that most of the data sources that were going into our MDM hubs, we were already using. So we had a fairly good idea of what was going on, and maybe that got us into a little bit of trouble because I would argue we could have done a little bit better job profiling. And not in the sense that we ignored what was in the data, but with the new project, we were using data a little bit differently. And so the assumptions that the old systems had about it, we found that it didn't always pan out. For example, and we just stumbled across this, we get data from the Board of Equalization about sales tax returns and in businesses and individuals who collect sales tax. They have two addresses. They have the address where they correspond with, and then they have a physical address. We thought it would be great for our MDM application to use both of those addresses. As we started to analyze the data, and actually as we were comparing how the records come together, we noticed that this physical address was not very unique. That individuals who were, say, doing swap meets or other mass kind of sales things, all were sharing an address. So there were, 7 or 8 addresses that probably had 1,000 customers there. And so that's not something you want to match on. It's not unique. It will give you some false results. So again, the idea of being able to profile your data and just the simple nuts, that would have stood out. Okay, you have 800 people with this address and 900 people with this address. That would have been a red flag. The next step is you go ahead and standardize the data. And the software does it as a way to bucket data so it can match likes to likes. But I would also recommend the AVI software that takes a look at an address and makes sure it's complete, and if things are missing, it can add and enrich those addresses, and that's going to help your matching results. Once you've done those steps, you load the data. You typically, you organize it into an individual or a person hub and a business entity hub, and those two share, individuals and business entities are very different. The type of data we know about them is very different, so you don't try to commingle them, and typically it's individuals and business entities, and you compare those. There's not a lot of cross comparison, which we can talk about that in a little bit. It would be nicer to be able to do that, but I understand it's not simple to do. Once you've loaded the data, so you load your sources, you have your members, then you start comparing within a source to identify duplicates and across sources to identify your entities. So you're building entities. We loaded and going back to the concept of members, every record you want to go from your source system goes there. You're not losing records unless you're making deliberate decisions to exclude them. So we loaded our personal income tax filers. We have about 36 million active that we're keeping track of. We had 500,000 duplicates. And I'll get to that in a later slide. That was great to find, but we don't know what we're going to do with them, to be honest. So you build your entities, and then you expose them, and then going back to the goal of the project, you can expose them to an OLTP application, the taxpayer folder. You can take them and all the associated income records and feed it to your audit or your compliance systems. So expose is more than just putting them up for people to look at. And a little bit about probabilistic matching. So the nice thing about an exact match is it's exact and you're done and you move on. The downside is you're losing a lot of opportunity to match, missing or incomplete records. When you're doing a probabilistic match, you're comparing like elements, names to names, first names to first names, street address to street address, and you evaluate each one of those components and you determine how common or rare it is and how alike or unlike, and you give a score. And you go through a process where you're bringing records together and you say, okay, yes, that's a match. Ooh, that's not a match. Okay, this is 9 times out of 10, I'm comfortable with this, but that one time, maybe someone should look at it. So you have the idea of, you have this, what's called an auto link threshold, that above this score, those match, move on. You also have the score, it becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly that these don't match. They're two different people. But then in between those two levels are the ones that they share a lot. They may be missing some things. They may And this is where you get in trouble because probabilistic matching means that it changes from run to run and things like that. But it may be father and son, a junior, senior. It may be, and this never fails to surprise me, it may be husband and wife with very similar names. This is, again, this is a big state, and anything that can go wrong often does go wrong. So, but again, the takeaway from this slide is you set your scores, and it's kind of the intro into the kind of the governance. This is where things get kind of exciting or terrifying or however what to do. Within that, and I see our data security folks are here in the room, the concept of these tasks is you have staff working them, and maybe they're seeing things they shouldn't. You have to manage that as well. So those are some of the challenges that I'll get to in some of the governance. Again, this is kind of the end state, the idea of the exposing. You have various systems and platforms. There are sources. They're feeding data into the MDM hub. At the end of the day, you have this centralized view of a customer that has components from each of the sources. It's picking the best, and the software will do that out of the box, but it's not very sophisticated. It's usually about how new or frequently it appears, or in our case, you can have some business rules about what is the best name, what is the best address. So either approach is available. Okay, so here's the fun part. We had our 5 major systems. Each one was supporting a business area. And what we learned pretty quickly is our different business areas don't see matching as the same. And it shouldn't have been a surprise. So our collection people who are going to take someone's bank account or issue a lien, our tax accounting folks who are going to post a payment or issue a refund, they want pretty conservative. It's got to be there. You know, don't mess this up. I don't want to take the wrong person's bank account. I don't want to refund someone money when they're not do it. On the other side of the table, you have our audit and non-filer folks who, no, let's cast the net wide. We want to see everything. Let's get all the possibilities because, you know, we're going to send a letter out. We're going to talk to the taxpayer. We're going to make a determination. So don't constrain us. We don't want to miss stuff. So it's the concept of an overmatch versus an undermatch. And so it was a couple of interesting meetings. You know, what do we do? We're not going to flip a coin. It's not the loudest person in the room. How do we do this? So what we came up with is we had representation from all the areas as we sat down and went through this, what's called a pair review. You know, what's a good match? What's a bad match? You know, we came up with a set of scores. We presented them to interested parties and said, okay, this is the impact. Here's the downside. Here's the upside. We created a governance group, enterprise data advisory team that had the managers responsible from these areas. And at the end of the day, they were the ones who blessed the various algorithms. And this is an ongoing process. And each time we add a new source, we go through this exercise. And there are some lessons learned that I will come back to. I think we all talk about that, but at this point I turn it over to Vicky. To me. Oh, I'm sorry, Jason.
All right, so thanks, Jeff. Weekly, I meet with several state people and, you know, from various departments. And I think why this topic kind of came to us is it seems like everybody I meet with at least has this issue in some way, shape, or form. It might not, you know, all the business problems seem completely different, but the problem is really the same. And so we thought that, you know, a lot of people might be interested in this. And a lot of people, you know, by show of hands, I'm just interested, how many other people are planning a master data management type of project or a data matching type of project? Yeah, so we've got a few. I mean, when I'm out there talking, I mean, a lot of people are like, you know, doing some investigation, some research on how you might get this thing done. And so we thought it would be really interesting just to, you know, there are a couple people that are already down the road on this. Obviously, franchise tax has been thinking about this for years and has been executing now for some time. So they're much more mature kind of in their stage of evolution than some other customers. And VoCal is a project that has just started. I'm trying to think of how long we've been out there, maybe 6 months to a year, and somewhere in between 6 months to a year. So obviously they're sort of on the other end of the maturity side of the equation. But again, I thought it would be interesting to sort of bring out the fact that this is a common problem, and it's a completely different business problem that we're trying to solve, right? So hopefully, the more examples we can provide, you can kind of see the common applicability of these methods and processes to solve this problem. So Vocal, and some of you might be familiar with the project or understanding kind of what it's trying to do, but there was a hugely bad election in 2000. Does anybody remember that? The hanging Chad and all that business? Yeah, so the federal government felt that that shouldn't happen, right? We should try to improve on that. And so there was the Help America Vote Act, which came through, which provided some guidance around minimum requirements and standards for states in terms of elections, and also some money, right? So that the states could fund some programs to go and modernize their systems and so forth. And so really HAVA is what it's called. Created these new standards and requirements, and California looked at it and said, hey, we have a great system right now, but it doesn't meet all of the requirements within the HAVA Act. And so they were kind of looking at it from a compliance perspective, and they acknowledged that we have some gaps here, and you can kind of see some of those up there. It's interesting, in California, all of the election, county or voter registration is really handled at each of the counties. So you can imagine that there's 58 county systems out there, each one with their own voter registration list. And the objective of Secretary of State is really, now with HAVA especially, is to maintain a single central list that gets certified for each election, right? Well, that sounds like an easy problem, but it's really not, because, as Jeff was mentioning, there's all these, this is a big state, and every problem you can imagine will definitely happen. And so there's duplicates, there's people moving from county to county, there's people pass away and people get incarcerated, and there's all these different examples of reasons why people shouldn't be on the certified voter registration list, and making sure that we're maintaining all of that for the millions and millions of California residents is important. So this VoteCal project is really around making sure that the state is meeting those minimum standards. And by the way, we're improving some things as well. You can see some of the opportunities there in terms of managing the business process in a much more efficient way. So the solution for VoteCal, it's funny, as I did some research for this and looking at the slides that we had and talking with Jeff, I swear that every MDM project diagram, the solution diagram, looks exactly the same, right? It's this big thing in the middle and a bunch of things feeding into it in some way. So it's, if you abstract it to that level, it's all the same. But the MDM solution there is different. First of all, we're solving a little bit of a different business problem. The systems that are feeding the central repository in this case are really outside of the Secretary of State, right? They're all the county systems, right? So it's a little bit different than franchise tax, which is their 5 core systems are kind of internal. The other thing that's somewhat different is that over at franchise tax, they're using some kind of out-of-the-box software tools to do this. Over at VoteCal, we're actually kind of creating some of these tools in a custom fashion to solve this specific business problem. And it's really just a combination of some data management tools that we have out there, as well as using a business rules engine to kind of write those rules. Jeff went through how we do probabilistic matching and things like that. Well, those can all be written in business rules and used for your matching and your duplicate identification and all this stuff. The other important component is interfaces, and I don't know if Jeff talked about this so much, or you talked a little bit about it, I think, but interfaces with third-party data sources, right? So, and a lot of states share data in each department. They might look at DMV records, or they might look at public health records. Dr. Scott was talking about vital records earlier. So similar to that, the voter registration system needs to look at some of these third-party data providers, and that's public health, have people passed away. It's corrections, are people incarcerated now? It's DMV. It's all these different data sources, and again used to improve the quality of the data and to ensure that we have the voter registration list correct. Okay, and that's it. And we're going to pop into lessons learned here. Did you want to cover?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. So what we thought to do is to get you guys started a little bit. If you're a lot of hands came up when I talked about who's going to do an MDM project. Is that in your plans? We thought one of the valuable things we might be able to provide you guys is just some of those lessons learned based on us going through it, right? So
sure. Yep. Thank you. So I alluded to this first bullet in that getting the key players and especially the business players there. And, there's a cynical side to this in that, you're working with your technology peers and you're pulling data from their systems and you may be telling them something that they don't want to hear, that your data is a little dirtier than, and everybody has their own work that they've identified and their customers want. And so the idea is that these business champions are the ones that are the tiebreaker, the escalator. So if you need data cleaned up and you can't, my peer has got better things to do, and he or she may be absolutely correct. It's that business person that makes the call and says, do you know what, you need to change your priorities. You need to do this. So that is the idea, and it helps you to solve your inevitable arguments about what's good and what's bad. This came as a kind of disappointing, I think, both to us and our technology partners, that we thought, okay, we'll profile the data, there'll be some cleanup, and we'll move on, and we'll go on to the next source. Well, I alluded to the fact that we have half a million duplicates, and that's a permanent workload. We're not sure how we're going to do that. The idea is we should be creating many fewer, but how are we going to clean those up? What resources? Do we go to the business area? There's not really a clean way to do this. And those are just the duplicates. That's where the software was working and was above. We have 1 million tasks, if you go back to that slide, that are near matches. And do you work those? Which ones do you work? Which are more important? I think the answer for us was that the duplicates are creating problems for the application, so that would be our focus. The near matches stand alone, and when we do support for our compliance efforts, we can deliver both the good matches and the near matches, and they can make decisions on what they want to do with them. So that's kind of the path that we took. Finally, the data governance means different things to different people. So some folks feel that data governance means anytime there's a problem with the data, you're responsible for fixing it. Obviously, the people who are doing that would think that, oh no, we have more important stuff to do. So I would argue we could have done a better job of defining exactly what data governance is. Having a charter that was probably more specific than what we had. What are we going to tackle? When are we going to tackle? So those are our lessons learned.
Pop through a few of the. So when I was talking with our folks that are out on the ground out at Secretary of State, I just kind of polled them and said, what have you learned so far? And one of the things they said, and it was interesting, as after when I was covering these with Jeff as well, I think he would have added these to his list for the most part as well. One of the things they said is a large part of the success of an MDM solution kind of centers on the standardization and cleanliness of the data you're pulling together. And the problem is if you're pulling it from 58 systems that you don't manage, a lot of that's out of your control. Right? And so I think at least acknowledging that and maybe building your plan around the fact that you're going to have to deal with a little bit of chaos as it results from that, right? So I think that's kind of the lesson there. The other thing is there's limitations in the ability to transform data, and Jeff hit on this a little bit actually earlier, and in some cases you can just leave that data there and abstract it to a level in the member entity that Jeff was talking about and do that, but I think there are restrictions around changing data, right? You don't necessarily want to do that. And so, making sure you're building your plan to ensure that you're complying with any policy or law there to ensure the integrity of that original data is important. And also that can create some issues with you, maybe timeline-wise, or your ability to actually manipulate the data like you'd like to. So just acknowledging that and building it into the plan is key. And finally, and Jeff hit on this too, is it's important to use your analytics to kind of assess the data, right, and see what you have out there. What's the nature of the data? So that you understand the scope or the uniqueness of the data problem that you might be trying to solve. And so doing a little bit of that heavy lifting up front, using some analytic tools to do that, will help you plan, maybe prevent some problems down the road as you move forward with your MDM project. So that's what we have for lessons, and what we wanted to do, and I think we finished in good time. So I think we've got 5 minutes or so, or 10 minutes. And I'm not getting the runoff from the guy back there. He told me he would. So we'd love to hear some questions if you guys have them. Any questions? Yes.
Looking at our program for data and input and so on, we saw at first there was a very low level, which was just definitions of terms that were being used on current forms by current, we had 4 different offices and 4 different locations. And what we kind of found was that just, like say, the term start of construction, and totally different things, everybody involved. Did you have a governance board that actually kind of worked on definitions prior to data strategy, where you got consensus of what the terms were that you were using for your data?
Yeah, we had a group to put together like a data glossary and data dictionary, and we met as, the acronym was the Legacy Evolution Team. So you had the architects from the various systems going over various terms. I think we're fortunate in that the decision was, we're going to focus our governance efforts on this new EDR project. We're not going to try to go back and create, fix past sins or mistakes. I think that's the path that you get a lot of resistance. So I think we kind of took the easy way out, trying to make sure that any net new development is following some type of standards.
When we mapped, didn't we also map the old definitions to the new as well? So if you have the same term that meant different things in different systems, we mapped those to what they meant in the new glossary. Right?
Correct, yes.
Do you have any sort of database built out then for how to hold the old definitions and new definitions and any other kind of data associated with it?
As part of the project, we are building a metadata repository. It's part of the IBM data or InfoSphere metadata workbench. That's the eventual destination. I would argue right now, there's still more Excel spreadsheets and those type of things.
Anybody else?
A question.
Yes.
So Jeff, how long did it take, or Jean, how long did it take for you to establish your governance?
So when we started this project, one of the early deliverables in our overall enterprise data to revenue project was a governance assessment. So, and I apologize, I don't remember cold. So we had our business partner come in and do a full assessment of our maturity on several domain areas, and data management was one of those. So they made some recommendations, and that was about 2 years ago. We then put together a small team to pull together the policies, the standards, and processes surrounding governance of data. So that took us about a year to get to the point where they had a charter. They determined what their role was. They got policies defined and approved at the departmental level. And they started establishing standards that would apply both to the EDR project and to anything new we were doing. So it took us probably, I would say, a year and a half to get to the point where it's a reasonably mature process, and it's working, and they're making decisions now and really helping us move forward with data.
And that was governance across probably like 4 or 5 areas. It's not just data.
Right, we've got 5 domains. We've got business process management, service-oriented architecture, data, security, and I always forget the 5th one. I always get 4. Help me out. Anyways, there are 5 domains. IT service management is the 5th one. So those 5 domains, they looked at governance across all of those. But for purposes of what we're talking about today, the data one is the one that is probably our second most mature process at FPB for governance of these domains.
So one of the things I hear there is, for all the people that put their hands up, they're thinking about a project, right? It took about a year, right, to flesh out those governance rules and processes. So, if you're thinking about it, probably now's a good time to get started on some of those things. Probably help your project out quite a bit. Yeah, Stephen.
I am Steve Maltzkowski, I was the MDM lead on the EDR project. I got an MDM lead. You mentioned the data construction as one of your examples. Some of the smaller attributes aren't nearly as critical. But we struggled for several months on identifying what an identity or what an entity was. So for a person, it's relatively straightforward. The goal is to match your data to a physical body. Right? easier said than done because data's wrong, typos, people are trying to hide, people share SSNs, people move around. There's not a lot of functional data that uniquely identifies a person. SSN is not unique, no matter how many people think it is.
We're all in trouble.
And we did pretty well for person. We went through that fairly quickly, but when you're talking about a business, what uniquely identifies a business? Well, to a pizza delivery guy, a business is an address and a name. Deliver this to McDonald's on Oregon Main Street. Well, that's different than McDonald's on C Street. But if you look at it from a tax perspective, are all these McDonald's the same one, or are they separate entities? And trying to identify the definition of what is a business, what is our unique entity, that took us months before we realized that was our problem, that everybody had different definitions because it came from different systems.
And I would argue we're still going round and round.
And
The example, a sole proprietor, so someone who, owns, they're not incorporated, they're not a pass-through entity of any sort. They file an individual tax return. Where do you put that person, And they're going to come to you with two sets of data. They're going to have their personal data, their social, their date of birth, their mailing address, but they also may have a federal ID because they have employees. They may have an ID from Board of Equalization or EDD. I think our compromise is that we actually split sole proprietors into two, and the business-like information goes into our organization or business hub, and the individual information goes into our person hub. And how that's going to play out, I don't know that we have the whole answer on that.
it's very critical, get those definitions done early, because that is one of our biggest hurdles in a long time. Some of the smaller attributes are not the less valuable, but the more lower level attributes aren't quite as critical in an MDM solution per se. Your overall data architecture definitely is. Because if you're not, like the example Jeff brought up with the address, this is the physical address for the person. Well, my physical address is my home. That's what we thought they were using, but no, they're using a physical address where they actually put their taco stand. And if everyone's using that, you're trying to use it as a unique identifier. It's not. There's 1,000 people that use the same address. Well, that's not going to help you say that this is the same person.
All right, I think we're out of time. Definitely getting the high sign now. So thanks, everybody, for coming. And if there's any questions, feel free to follow up with any one of us. Thank you.